Mr. Harrison, the young man on the line said politely, we just wanted to confirm a large transfer from your retirement account. What transfer? $25,000 to a checking account under the name Daniel Harrison.
I spent 43 years waking up before sunrise, through snowstorms, layoffs, recessions, and nights when sleep felt like a luxury. I worked overtime and took every extra shift I could find. My wife, Margaret, and I never chased luxury. We chased stability. Every dollar we saved was meant to build a small, quiet legacy for our children. We wanted them to have security we never had growing up. Over the decades, we built college funds, emergency savings, and retirement accounts, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. By the time I turned 72, we believed our financial future was solid. After a lifetime of discipline, it felt good knowing we had something meaningful to pass on. The first sign that something was wrong came from an unexpected phone call from the bank. The young man on the line politely asked me to confirm a large transfer from my retirement account. When he told me $25,000 had been sent to an account under my son Daniel's name, I felt a strange coldness settle in my chest. I hadn't authorized any transfer. The banker explained that the authorization came through our online access. Suddenly, I remembered the afternoon 6 months earlier when Daniel insisted on helping us modernize our finances. He had told me it would make things easier so we wouldn't have to drive to the bank anymore. I trusted him without hesitation. After all, he was my son. When I logged into the account myself, the truth hit me like a punch to the stomach. That transfer wasn't the only one. There were dozens of them. 10,000 here, 15,000 there, smaller withdrawals scattered across several months. The money had been quietly flowing out of our accounts into accounts connected to our own children. Daniel was there, of course, but so were Lisa and Brian. Over the past 6 months, nearly $300,000 had disappeared. Margaret sat beside me at the kitchen table as we scrolled through the records. Her hand slowly covered her mouth in disbelief. What hurt even more than the money were the small notes attached to some transfers. One said, "Helping ourselves early." Another said, "Dad won't notice." One even said, "Old people money." That night, Margaret cried quietly in our bedroom. She didn't scream or shout. She simply asked the question that hung in the air between us. What do we do now? I sat by the window looking out at the quiet street where we had lived for over 30 years. It finally became clear what hurt the most. Our children didn't just steal money. They believed we were too old to understand what was happening. In their minds, age meant confusion, weakness, and silence. They thought we would never notice, and even if we did, we wouldn't know how to fight back. But they had underestimated something important. Getting older doesn't erase experience, it sharpens it. The next morning, I called an old friend of mine, Robert Klein, a retired attorney who had spent decades handling financial cases. I explained everything carefully, from the online access to the transfer records. Robert listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he asked a single question that changed everything. "Do they think you don't know?" I told him yes. He let out a quiet chuckle and said, "Good, that makes this much easier." Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret and I played the roles our children had already assigned us. When they visited, we acted confused about technology and grateful for their help. Daniel patiently explained simple banking apps to me as if I were learning how to use a phone for the first time. Lisa showed Margaret how to check balances online, speaking slowly like she was teaching a small child. Brian even joked about how hard technology must be when you're old. We smiled, nodded, and thanked them. Meanwhile, Robert was gathering something far more powerful than their arrogance: evidence. Years earlier, we had placed most of our savings into a family trust designed to protect the money and ensure it would be distributed responsibly. Hidden within that trust was a clause Robert had recommended long ago.
If any beneficiary attempted to misuse or exploit access to the funds, they could be permanently removed from the trust. Robert collected bank logs, authorization records, transfer histories, and IP addresses connected to every transaction. The paper trail was undeniable. Once the evidence was organized, he filed a civil fraud case that reframed everything our children had done. Legally speaking, they hadn't borrowed money from their parents, they had stolen it. 3 months later, Margaret and I invited the kids over for dinner. Everything looked normal. The table was set with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and Margaret's famous apple pie. The conversation started casually, just like it always had. Then, Robert arrived and stepped into the dining room. The moment our children saw him, the mood shifted. He calmly placed 3 sealed envelopes on the table, one for each of them. When Daniel opened his, the color drained from his face. Inside was a formal notification stating that he had been permanently removed from a beneficiary of the Harrison Family Trust. Lisa opened hers and began shaking. Brian stared at the papers in disbelief as Robert explained the situation in clear legal terms. The second document was even worse for them. It was a legal demand for the return of every dollar that had been taken, along with penalties and legal fees. The total owed was more than $400,000. Brian slammed his hands on the table and accused us of suing our own children. Margaret looked him calmly and told him the truth. They made that choice the moment they decided their parents were too old to understand what was happening. Daniel tried one last emotional argument, reminding us we were family. I nodded slowly and agreed that we were. But parents spend their lives teaching lessons, and sometimes the most important lessons come late. I slid the final document across the table. It was the updated trust agreement. Nearly $2 million that remained in the trust had been redirected to scholarships, veterans charities, and community programs that helped struggling families. Daniel stared at the page in disbelief and asked if we had really given everything away. I told him we hadn't given it away at all. We had invested it in people who understood respect. The fallout that followed was exactly what Robert predicted. There were angry phone calls, threats of lawsuits, and accusations of betrayal. But the evidence was airtight, and eventually the reality set in. To settle the case quietly, our children were forced to repay every dollar they had taken. Cars were sold, homes were refinanced, and debts were rearranged. The money eventually came back, though the relationships never quite did. These days, Margaret and I spend most evenings on the porch watching the sunset behind the trees. Life is quieter now. We're not focused on wealth or inheritance anymore. Instead, we appreciate the peace that comes with knowing we protected what we built. Age has taught us many lessons, but one stands above the rest. Growing older doesn't make you foolish, it teaches you patience, and patience, when the moment finally arrives, can be the most powerful form of karma there is.